So I've been fortunate enough to be one of the early users of KosherSwitch. Andy Menashe showed me the KosherSwitch when it was still in a prototype plastic box, where I could actually see the inner workings of the switch and you know, understand how it is that you can, you know, in a very indirect way, control an electrical circuit. And it really is one of the most incredible things I've ever seen. It's an ingenious idea. And you know, I'd like to point out that I've been using it in my house now for well over a year, I would say. And you know, it certainly feels different than anything else in the house, any other switch or timer. You know, I have different types of switches and timers in my house also. I'm a technologist, so I'm always playing with the latest and greatest in technology, automation, timers, all of that stuff. This doesn't look or feel anything like the other switches. And when we interact with the switch during the week, when it's in normal mode, you know, lights come on and go off as expected, instantaneously. But when it's in Shabbos mode, it's a completely different experience. You know, you wait for a green light, you move a piece of plastic up or down, and then nothing happens. And you could come back moments later and notice the lights are on, or it could be a while. So, you know, it certainly is not like using any normal switch. The experience using KosherSwitch, I remember the first Shabbat in my home, when I came downstairs and the kitchen was dark. It was still early in the morning, and my little kids were up, as they always are, before the sun even rises. And you know, I wanted to start making them, you know, a little breakfast or something to eat before I go out to shul. So I walked over to the KosherSwitch and I flicked it on. You know, I just pushed a button up, and my older daughter, who was probably just under 10 years old at the time and fully understands what Shabbos means, I could see her eyes widen, and she said, "Daddy, what are you doing? It's Shabbat." And just as soon as I flicked the switch, I said, "I didn't do anything. Look around. The lights on yet?" No. So she didn't understand at first. I explained to her later what this is. But as we started, you know, pouring some milk and making breakfast for her, all of a sudden the lights came on, and she just kind of looked around and wanted to see if anyone else had walked into the room and mistakenly turned the lights on, but no one else was there. So I think she started to understand what the KosherSwitch is about. So that was a pretty interesting moment to me as a father who has to answer to a young child who's learning about Shabbat. It was a bit of an awkward moment, but at the same time, she could very clearly see that there was nothing that I was doing directly or even within a few seconds that caused anything to happen, and that experience actually made it a lot easier to explain. As she gets older and I show her some of the early drawings and explain to her, you know, how the KosherSwitch actually works, when her mind can grasp stuff like this, I'm sure she'll be, you know, intrigued all over again, as I was. I don't think that the KosherSwitch causes any kind of confusion, not with guests and not with my kids, because a lot of times people who've never seen a KosherSwitch before come in and don't even think it's a light switch. They just think it's another one of the cool devices that I have around the house. It's only when I tell them that this is actually called a KosherSwitch, and it can act like a normal light switch, but can also allow you to interact with electricity on Shabbat, that they even begin thinking of it at all like a switch. It doesn't look or really operate anything like a typical toggle switch. I wouldn't say that the KosherSwitch looks like a dimmer. Maybe to someone who's seeing it from very far away, it may look slightly like a dimmer, because some of the dimmers that we know are kind of round knobs, but others are sliders. But the sliding dimmers also kind of have a different look, and there's a larger area of travel where that slider would go up and down. And the moment you interact with the switch, you can tell that it's not sliding, but it's kind of gives you like a fake click, which is really a piece of plastic that's clicking into another. So I don't think there's any kind of, what I would consider marat ayin or anything like that. I don't worry about that in any way. And, from what I understand, neither do some pretty big rebbeim. As far as confusion and, being in the spirit of Shabbat, I don't think that using a kosher switch is in any way not in the spirit of Shabbat. Of course, if you're going around your house just randomly flicking, kosher switches on for no reason and turning them off for no reason, that kind of childish behavior itself is not in the spirit of Shabbat. But in fact, if you're going into a room where you want to prepare breakfast for your kids, or you want to learn or find something on Shabbat, and you have to walk into a dark room, you may think twice about doing what you're doing. You have to worry about, stubbing your toe or tripping over something and possibly getting hurt just because you forgot to leave a light on. To me, I actually appreciate having this on Shabbat, and I think that in some ways it even improves the experience and gets people who otherwise would not be so excited about Shabbat to be a little more excited about it, to see that it's not such an oppressive thing. See, the problem of interacting with electricity, if you will, on Shabbat, there's no isur to illuminate a room on Shabbat. There's nothing wrong with bringing light into a room. I mean, you can open the drapes. There are even some lamps out there that have a cover on them that you can pull the cover up, and all of a sudden the room is lit up. So if it was an isur, doing any of that would be an isur. The isur has been with the way that we interact with electricity since the invention of electricity. When Thomas Edison invented the light bulb in the late 1800s, and then started in the 1880s, I believe it was, when he patented the distribution of electricity, and then it started flowing into some key stations in Manhattan and then into people's homes. Ever since then, we've been interacting with electricity through a typical contact closure toggle switch that either completes a circuit or does not. The way the kosher switch interacts with electricity is completely different than that. This is the first new way of controlling electricity since, it's been over 100 years now. And if you want to understand more about how the kosher switch achieves this, there are a number of videos out there and a number of 3D animations that have been beautifully done that actually show and explain how this works, and anyone could understand, even with the most basic knowledge of mechanics and electricity, could understand how this is completely different. This is totally new and groundbreaking. My challenges with KosherSwitch is only that there has been maybe one Shabbat that I can recollect where I forgot to put the KosherSwitch into Shabbat mode before Shabbat. I wish I had done it then, but very simply, I just didn't use the electricity in that room on Shabbat, and I only wish that there was a way to, first of all, get more kosher switches in my house. I can't wait for it to launch, but also that there was a way to perhaps remember to put them into Shabbos switch. Maybe there's a way that they can go into Shabbos mode automatically. I understand kosher switch is working on these ideas right now. I can't wait to see what they come up with next. As far as difficulties using the switch on Shabbat, really there are none. People have asked me if I've ever accidentally flicked the kosher switch, when I shouldn't on Shabbat. First of all, if you walk up to it and you forget to put it in Shabbat mode, you very quickly see that there's no light on at all. There's no red or green LED. So, unless you're not even looking at the wall, you can't really make that mistake. And if you're not looking at the wall, it's just like mistakenly turning on a switch, any other switch. Once it is in Shabbat mode, very simply, when you see a red light, stop. When you see a green light, go. So the way I like to do it is I watch a red light go through its cycle, which is just a few seconds, and the instant it turns green, that's when I move the switch up or down. I know I have more than enough time to do that, so there's no question that I would be even remotely possibly, violating anything. It's very easy, very intuitive to use, and it's an absolute pleasure. The first time that I used the kosher switch in normal mode, I just moved it up, lights came on, I moved it down, the lights went off, and it just seemed like I'm controlling lights normally. Just didn't look like a switch. The first time I used it on Shabbat, I waited for a green light, turned it on, and nothing happened. And for that instant, I was nervous that, first of all, I wanted to make sure I did it right. And I was wondering when I'll get the lights to come on. But within a couple of minutes, the lights were on, and, it obviously takes a little bit longer than that instant gratification of having the lights come on in a room. But immediately was reminded that otherwise I would not be able to turn these lights on for the whole of Shabbat. And waiting a few seconds to a few minutes is very little to ask, and I was very happy and fortunate to have it. Other people's barrier towards adopting KosherSwitch into their home, I think one of the biggest psychological barriers for people is, what if my neighbors see me, touching what looks like a switch on the wall and turning on lights on Shabbat? Well, number one, just like we have a commandment to avoid anything that would be considered marat ayin, we're also commanded not to jump to conclusions if we see someone doing something that looks like marat ayin. So that's something that people should keep in mind. And if you think that a Shabbos observing Jew is interacting with electricity on Shabbat, maybe take a closer look. If you're looking through their window and you think they're touching a switch, if you look a little bit closer, you would see that it looks nothing like a switch. And perhaps you would even be intrigued and ask what this is, and maybe even you can argue that that's a form of learning. KosherSwitch, I don't believe KosherSwitch is a loophole in any way. I'm not, a religious authority by any means, but from what I understood about the way KosherSwitch works, and then, of course, I did my own due diligence and asked my Rebbe, who happens to be a big posek, Rav Eliyahu ben Chaim, what he thought of it, and the way he explained it to me, that there are, at least 3 different layers between what would be considered a loophole or an issur in any way, and the way KosherSwitch works. It's at least 3 times removed from anything that could be considered a loophole in any way. I'm not worried about it. KosherSwitch technology, like anything else in the world, when it falls into the wrong hands, perhaps could be taken too far. Then again, you see religious extremism all over the world, taking everything too far. So we have to keep in mind that everything needs to be done in moderation. Everything ought to be used when it needs to be used. As I said earlier, I wouldn't go around, turning lights on and off in my house just because I could on Shabbat, because I have kosher switches all over the place. Nor would I activate, I'm kind of looking into the future a little bit. I can see other kosher switch enabled devices around the house, and when I look towards that, I wouldn't go around activating things that I don't need to on Shabbat. There's, no violation of Shabbat by using a kosher switch, but making a game out of it, just like anything else, is a violation of Shabbat. I've gone to hospitals to visit sick people on Shabbat, and I've used doors that were specifically designed for entry and exit on Shabbat, and I've used elevators that were Shabbos elevators, which are in no way a violation of Shabbat. But of course, if you go into a place like that and start riding the elevator up and down just for fun, that's not what it's for. To those who have not experienced KosherSwitch yet, or to the pundits, or those who think that KosherSwitch is some evil device that's going to change Shabbat forever, I say, yes, KosherSwitch is a device that will change Shabbat forever, but will change it for the good. I urge you to at least hold one in your hand, take a look at it, watch the video of how it works, and speak to your rabbi. Everyone should consult with their own personal religious, advisor to make the decision of whether or not KosherSwitch is right for you. KosherSwitch is right for today's world. In fact, it would have been right a whole lot longer ago. But I would say at least give it a chance and speak to a Rebbe. Either way, whether you decide for it or against it, that's a form of learning. So why not try something new, learn something new, and then make your decision for yourself.